Okay, let's begin. Today we're going to be dividing polynomials. We know how to add them, subtract them, and we know how to multiply them. Today we're going to learn how to divide them. Now, there are other ways. You could do long division with polynomials, but we're not going to be learning that today. We're going to learn an easier way to divide them called synthetic division. Okay, so let's start up here with this first example. X squared plus 3x minus 12 divided by x plus 2. Okay, with synthetic division, you're always going to make yourself a little, like half of a box or half of a square. And that's going to be for the binomial that you're dividing by. But since it's x plus 2, we're going to put a negative 2 in the box. Okay, you always do the opposite. So like over here with this, when it's x minus 1, we're going to put a positive 1 in that box. Okay, now you take the top polynomial and you list its coefficients and the constants. So like what number is the coefficient of this x squared? Okay, so we're going to look at this trinomial and we're going to identify its coefficients and its constants. Like isn't there a 1 beside that x squared?
Yes.
So we bring down a 1. Beside the x is a 3, and then our constant is a negative 12. Make sure you pay attention to the sign. Okay, so that's just to set it up. Okay, so before we get started, let's just practice setting this one up. What would I pull down first? What number? 1, because that x cubed has a coefficient of 1. What about the next term? 3. The next one? And the last one? Right. Okay, that's just to set it up and get it ready for synthetic division. Okay, now, to start the process, this first number every time will just drop straight down below the line. Okay, that number, no matter what it is, will just always drop straight down. Okay, now what you're going to do is you're going to take that number and you're going to multiply it by your box number, which is negative 2. What's 1 times negative 2? Okay, and that fills in right here. See, 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. Now you just basically do what it says. What's 3 minus 2? 1. Okay, now you go with that number and multiply it by the box number. So we have another 1 times negative 2, which is negative 2. Okay, now what's negative 12 minus 2? Negative 14. Okay, so we're almost finished, but now we have to write our answer. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind is your answer is always going to be a degree lower than the question. See how this one was x squared? So our answer is going to start x to the first, but you all know we don't really have to write the first power. Okay, and then its coefficient is 1, and then plus 1, and that is a remainder of negative 14. Okay, so even this one right here wasn't really necessary, because you have to write a 1 beside the x. So really we could have just written x plus 1 with a remainder of negative 14. Okay, now let's try this one. So what do we do first? Hold on. Okay, so once you have it set up, the first number always just drops straight down. Okay, it'll always just drop straight down to the bottom. Then you start the process of multiplying whatever's on the bottom by your box number. So what's 1 times 1? 1. And then basically you just do what you see. We have a positive 3 and a positive 1, which would be a positive 4. Now that that's your bottom number, you multiply it by the box number, and it makes a 4, because 4 times 1 is 4. Now we see that we have a negative 1 plus 4, which is 3. And then we multiply that 3 by our box number, and we get a 3, and that becomes a 0. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. So now remember, you always start your answer a degree lower. So since our question was x cubed, our answer is going to start x squared. And then you just fill in the numbers. Like that would be 1x squared plus, the next term would be 4x, and then plus 3. But this time a remainder of 0. Does that make sense? Example 3. Okay, what's the first thing that I need to do? You put the number in the box. What number will go in the box? -4. You always do the opposite of what you're dividing by. Since we're dividing by x plus 4, we put a -4 in the box. Okay, then we have to fill in our top numbers. So what would go first? 1, because that's 1x cubed. Okay, but now we run into a small problem. Look what happens. We jump straight from the x cubed term to the x to the first term. So what does that mean about the x squared term? It must have been 0x squared. So we have to fill in a 0 for that missing x squared term. Does everybody see that? Because look, it went straight from x cubed to x to the first. So that means the x squared term was 0. And you have to fill in a 0 for it. Okay, then we fill in the -13 and then the +12. Okay, now our first step is to bring down the first number. Okay, so then you take it and you multiply it by the box number, which is -4. So 1 times -4 is -4. And then you just do what you see. We see a 0 minus 4, which is -4. And now that it's the bottom number, you multiply it by the box number and you get a +16. And now we have -13 plus 16, which is 3. And we multiply it by the box number and we get -12. And so our remainder ends up being 0. Okay, it's nice when the remainder is 0. Now, since it started x cubed, your answer is going to start x squared. Okay, and it starts out with a 1. And remember, you really don't have to write that 1, but I'm just kind of showing you that these numbers come over here. Okay, so next we have the -4, and it would go on the x to the first term. And then +3 with a remainder of 0. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, let's try another one. Okay, for practice problem number 1, what would I fill in the box? -3. Okay, then what would go right here? What would be the first number? 1, because there's a 1 beside that x squared, then a 11, and then we would put a 24. And there were no missing terms, so there's no need for a 0. It went straight from the x squared term to the x first term to no x at all. So now the first step we do is what? Bring down that first number, which is 1. It won't always be 1. It's just been 1 on all of these. Okay, what do we do with that number? Multiply it by -3, and it becomes -3. So now we have 11 minus 3, which is 8, and we multiply it by -3, and it gives us a -24, and then that becomes a 0. Now, obviously, that last number is our remainder. We're going to have a remainder of 0. What do we do with these two numbers? Right, since this was x squared, our answer starts out as x to the first, and it has a 1 beside it, which you really don't have to write, and then +8. Okay, let's try one more. Okay, what will go in the box, or the half a box? +6. Okay, first look at it closely and see if any terms were skipped. Were any terms skipped? No, there's not going to be a need to fill in a 0 because it goes straight from x squared to x to the first and then no x at all. So what are my numbers over here? Right? Okay, then what do I do? Drop the 1, and what do I do with it? Multiply by 6, and that produces a 6. What does that become? -12. Multiply it by 6, and you get a -72. So this one doesn't work out as nice because what's our remainder this time? -10. Okay, so I know I'm going to have a remainder of -10. And then what would the answer look like with that 1 and -12? 1x minus 12, but you need to start getting in the habit of just writing x minus 12. Writing that 1 is not necessary. I mean, you could, but on a multiple choice test, you would never see a 1 written right there. Okay, your assignment is to work the practice problems on pages 16 and 17. Okay?